excited to have we are really excited to have Dr. Craig Wynne. He's an associate professor of English in the Division of Arts and Humanities in the College of Arts and Sciences here at the University of the District of Columbia. Our goal is, and please, if you have a topic you'd like for us to discuss, just let us know, let me know, let Dr. McCrary know, and we have the flexibility to offer whatever it is that you would like to hear about in our intimate lunchtime learning webinars. So Dr. Wynne, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. The topic is Business Communication 101, the little things you don't think about. That doesn't say think about, but the little things that are important. So Dr. Wynne, I would ask that you put your view on side-by-side speaker so that you will be able to see the slides and also see Dr. Wynne. Dr. Wynne, I'm going to turn it over to you. Please keep your, you can keep your cameras on or off, but also make sure your mics are muted. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Reed. I'm not sure how to switch it to side-by-side speaker. I mean, I know I have the PowerPoint up.
No, actually, you're okay.
Okay.
The other viewers that need to do that, you're good.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much for that, for your wonderful introduction, Dr. Reed. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time on your lunch to come hear this presentation. And as Dr. Reed said, my name is Dr. Craig Wynne, and I'm an associate professor in the English program at the main campus of the University of the District of Columbia. This is my third year at UDC as a Firebird. Before I came here, I was at Hampton University for 6 years, and I have a PhD in Rhetoric and Writing Studies from the University of Texas at El Paso. And as part of my work at UDC, I teach in the IJET program where I teach at the first year writing. And I also teach technical writing in the English program, which is essentially a course in business communication where students learn about writing resumes, cover letters, as well as workplace correspondence that a lot of us I think tend to take for granted, like emails. And we're going to talk a little bit about those things this afternoon, but I want us to start with a writing exercise. And as part of my pedagogical toolbox, I employ a lot of free writing in class where students start out the first few minutes of class by writing something related to a topic that we're learning about. So what I'd like for us to do is take about 5 minutes to just get something down on into a physical form, Word document, a piece of paper, even your phone. Don't post it into the chat just yet, though, but just describe a professional email that you had to write recently to a colleague, a supervisor, stakeholder, or even a student, if you're an instructor. So just take about 5 minutes just to write about an experience you've had with a professional email. All right. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. All right. We'll convene in 5 minutes.
Dr. Wynne, I do have a question. Are we writing the email or just describing our experience of writing the email?
Yeah, just describing the experience you had writing the email. About a minute. Okay. All right. So if you're in a really good groove, it's like I tell my students, if you're in a really good groove, you have more to write, you can feel free to cue. But I would like to hear from a couple of us because I do want to use your experiences to guide the bulk of our presentation. So would anyone like to share their experiences with a professional email that you've had to write recently? Right. I see Dr. Reed has your hand up.
Okay, so one of the professional email, I was connecting a graduate student and a member of our university staff because she was having some difficulties with some things that she needed to get taken care of. And she came to my office, she said she was depressed, she was very frustrated. And so the first email that I wrote was connecting her to a source. And what I realized, I knew what I was talking about. She knew what I was talking about, but the person who I was sending the email to had no idea. So I had to make sure that I gave a comprehensive overview of why I was connecting these two people together. But I know most people don't like to read. So I need to make sure it was very concise and condensed so that I could get my point across in as many words as I could possibly do, but make sure that the person who I was sending this email to understood why I was connecting the two people together.
Okay, so you had to draw a very fine line there because you want to be as explicit as possible because your audience doesn't necessarily know the entire situation, but at the same time keep it brief as well so that they still remain engaged. So that sounds like that was the challenge we're facing. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the challenge I was facing because I thought if I didn't share at least some information, it would get lost why I was making this connection. So yes.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Excellent. We'll refer to that particular challenge during the presentation. Would anybody else like to share any experiences you've had writing professional emails at all? Okay. All right. I see Elmira Azongwed. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Asongwed.
Azongwed. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So what was your experience?
So this morning I was trying to make sure a student was cleared for graduation and to get a residency status updated. For some reason, admissions and enrollment have so many glitches for transfer students that cause errors that are very difficult to resolve. So it caused frustration for the student, frustration for me. Nothing was resolved. We enroll students every 6 weeks, and it just is not something that is operational.
Okay, and Ms. Dr. Azongwed, what's your role at UDC?
I'm a faculty member and I am currently the program director for BS Nursing in Causes.
Okay. All right. So, okay, has the issue been, and just out of curiosity, has the issue been resolved as of this morning?
No, it has not.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. So it sounds like your email is going to be just one in a in a string of them, and we'll talk
Long string.
a very very long string. So, and we'll talk about that as well as how to use these to develop our relationships. But thank you both for being willing to share. And the reason I wanted you to just share your experiences with writing emails is because this is something that we do on a daily basis, and a lot of us don't really give a second thought to it. But in researching this presentation, I found that according to a study from SendGrid, this is the most recent I was able to find, 74% of people chose from professionals that they surveyed chose email as their preferred method of communication. And I know that for me, email is the way that I communicate most of the time. Sometimes, particularly with students, I do like to have in-person conversations because tone can get misinterpreted. But for the most part, I think most of us do use email or some form of text-based communication to communicate. And Dr. Zongwed, had you ever met the person you wrote to? Had you ever met them in person before? Or was this your first interaction with them, this email?
Both. Both. One of the individuals I was familiar with, another was new to me.
Okay. So in this particular case, this email would be that person's first impression of you. And a lot of times when we're establishing a relationship, whether it's inside the university or outside the university, it'll often be the first impression that we get. And when Dr. McCrary and I were talking about the possibility of this presentation, he was talking about how faculty try to build and develop relationships with the funders who are financing grants and studies, and in a lot of those cases, email is the first point of contact that we're making. And with respect to writing, and I have a presentation, but if at any point you do have something, you have a question, you can feel free to raise your hand. I do want to try to make this presentation fit your needs as best as possible. But you do want to always consider the professional relationship you have with your reader or your readers. And in the case of Dr. Reed's and Dr. I just have to check your name for a second. Dr. Reed's and Dr. Zongwed's emails. This, in some cases, they may not have established a professional relationship with some of the readers in those emails just yet. So that's all. So there's always a context. If you haven't met your reader, how do you go about negotiating how to communicate? And what is the story behind the immediate reason that you're writing? And when I say the story, what are the events that are taking place? And in the case of Dr. Reed's email, the story is that the student with whom she's communicating is having a very difficult time, having some personal issues outside of class, and in this email, Dr. Reed needs to present this story to the appropriate source, and it's the same concept with Dr. Zonweg's email, that the student is hoping to graduate soon. They need to get cleared, and there are a lot of obstacles in in this person's way. So those are things to consider. What's going on, and also let's say for example, if we know that admissions and enrollment, if that department is undergoing some issues, undergoing some problem, like for example, they're short staffed, or if they're having some issues on their end with technology, how does that influence the way that you're writing as well? So is there more to the story that we're not always seeing? And as well, what specific values are important to your readers' organizational or departmental needs? And one of our core values at UDC, for example, are trying to help move students into transformative pathways to the middle class as well. So with respect as well, what are we doing to develop our own needs, and how do we consider those needs in how we communicate? And if we're writing to people inside UDC, they're pretty familiar with the organizational culture in which we work. So we have kind of a shared discourse or a shared language that we might use. But if we're writing toward someone outside an organization, like a funder, for example, say the NIH, the National Institute of Health, what is their culture? So what do we need to do to be able to organize or to tailor our language toward what their needs are, as well as what current events within or outside an organization or department may influence how readers interpret your writing. So, for example, let's say the admissions and enrollment department in Dr. Zongwood's email. Let's say we've learned that that a couple of people were just left that department and they're short-staffed. So so it might be a good idea to try to keep that in mind as we're writing our correspondence. At the beginning, we say, so I understand you're short-staffed, but I'd like to find out what is the event, so what's happening with my students. So it kind of helps to modify the tone based on what we know about certain events that are happening inside that particular organization. And are there any cultural differences? And here at UDC, we have such a diversity of nationalities and cultures that among our student population and among our population and staff and faculty. So as far as cultural differences are concerned, how might readers interpret what we're saying? And what medium do your readers prefer? And emails are the most often used in communications, but do people prefer memos or letters or reports? And we start to know that as we get to know and build relationships with our readers. And one of the main thing to do, and this is for those of us who teach in first year writing, or if we teach thesis statements or claims, this is a very good point to start from. So my primary purpose is to blank so that my audience blanks. So the big thing to really ask ourselves when we're communicating is, what do we want to happen as a result of this correspondence? So what is the outcome that we're desiring? And in Dr. Reed's email, it sounds like she wants the student to get the assistance that she needs from this department, so that she can so she has some support to help her with her personal issues, so that she can successful on the graduate level. And it's the same principle with Dr. Zongwood's email, that she wants to have the student cleared for graduation. So that purpose is very simple as far as that goes. Starting off with, what is it that I want out of this interaction? and assessing our audience's needs. So the thing to ask is, who is my main reader? And so, for example, this person in admissions, it sounds like it's your main reader, but who else could be reading this as well? Could the student that I'm trying to help be reading this as well? If you're and Dr. Zongwei, did you copy your student on the email that you sent to admissions?
I copied her on the very pleasant ones. I didn't copy her on the ones where I was at my limit of frustration.
Okay. That sounds like an excellent strategy. I take that approach as well. So the chances are my student is reading this as well. So I'm going to choose to copy that student so that they know that I'm trying to help them. I also want them to see me at my best. I want them to see my positive side. I don't want them to see my frustration. So I'm going to eliminate that factor from my audience when I'm writing in this particular tone. So it sounds like you really considered who could be some other potential readers. And I know sometimes when you were writing, did you think that maybe a supervisor could be reading, perhaps the head of admissions or somebody above them at all?
You know, after several emails, I did forward it up the chain, starting with my director of nursing.
Okay, so there are other potential readers, and you want your director to know what the issue is as well. So in a way, you're adjusting your language to meet the needs of those readers as well. And so that's a big question, is who's going to be reading my document? It's not necessarily just going to be the person I'm writing to directly, but there are other people involved as well. And what do you want your audience to know, to believe, or to be able to do after reading your content? And have you narrowed your topic to best focus on what you want your audience to know? And in this particular case, both Dr. Reed and both Dr. Zongwei did that. They said that this is what needs to happen. We like to clear these hurdles so that these students can get what they need. And what are your audience's needs in relation to this, into the subject? So what does this person in admissions need to know? What does this contact person in this office need to know as far as that goes? And what do they know about the subject? So we would assume that somebody in admissions would know how to clear this particular hurdle so that this student can graduate, or they would at least know the right person to refer them to. And do you have more than one audience? And in the case of what Dr. Zongwei was just telling us now, there is more than one audience. It's not just the person in admissions, but it's also the head of the nursing program, so that they're in the loop. And in case, it's also the student as well. They're the major stakeholder involved in your correspondence, because they're the ones ultimately trying to graduate. They're the ones who are going to benefit from the outcome that you're seeking for them. And if you have multiple audiences, do they have different levels of knowledge about your subject? And obviously a student doesn't quite have the knowledge that this person in admissions has about these pathways as far as graduation is concerned. And what do you think your audience's feelings are going to be about your subject? Are they going to be sympathetic? Are they going to be hostile toward the subject matter? Are they going to be neutral? So, and a lot of times we don't always know 100%, but we always want to think what is our audience necessarily going to think about this particular idea? How might they respond? And does your writing acknowledge other or contrary points of view about the subject? So if you're writing to a person, maybe a supervisor who you anticipate could have some points of disagreement about your subject, what might they say as far as that goes? And is your tone ultimately respectful? And we'll talk a little bit about that as far as that goes. But are you using words and phrases that that make sure that that you're respecting the other person as a human on the other end of your correspondence? And have you selected the right medium for your subject and audience? And I haven't experienced this as much as at UDC, but before I came here, I was at Hampton University, and memos were a very popular way to communicate. So there were times when I would send an email with respect to an issue, and then I would get a response saying, please write up a memo explaining what your needs are. And after a little bit, I just know, okay, I'm talking to this person, they're going to want a memo on this. So as I built a relationship, I know what it is that they want. So I know in this particular case, a memo is going to be the appropriate medium to communicate. And does the format that you're using enhance audience understanding? So, and a lot of times memos can be more appropriate because they have a certain structure to them that can benefit your audience in a way that an email might not necessarily. Okay. All right. So with respect to getting your thoughts out first. And I always teach my students in my first year writing and my business writing classes about this, but brainstorming as a way to just get your ideas out into a physical form first before taking them live. So I always like to call it interviewing yourself, because essentially you're just trying to go through your mind through what it is you're writing. And what I do a lot of the time, if I'm writing an email that could set off a few red flags or could be very sensitive, I'll write it out in a Word document first, and I'll use the 5 W's: what happened, who did it happen to, when did it happen, where did it happen, why, and what is the outcome that I'm looking for. I'll sometimes use that to just try to get what I need to in a physical form. So just whatever's in your mind, just start by getting it into a physical form first before hitting send. And it can also be a good idea to test your ideas out on another person. There are times where if I'm writing a sensitive email, I might send it to a colleague or to a chair just to see what they just to see am I saying this in a sensitive enough way? Am I saying this the right way before I actually send it to the audience? So I find brainstorming can be a very good tool. Now, also using other sources of information, and we call this repurposing. And I do this a lot sometimes for letters of recommendation, where I'll take existing content from one document and then I'll put it into another. So this way, if someone asks me for a letter of recommendation, I can take something from something I wrote for another person, and I can fine tune it. I can tweak it to fit the needs of that particular student. And establishing your scope, and I'm sure we've all probably had the experience of reading emails that just seem to just go on for way too long. And I think like Dr. Zongwood was saying, people don't like to read, so being concise is important. So considering how much information do I really need to include? And those of us who teach writing or who assign papers in our classes, we tend to like the use of details. But when I teach my business writing students, I tell them that it goes in a very different direction in that respect. That you don't always need to include every single piece of information, but just be concise. A lot of times, just include the main points. So in this particular case, how much information do I need to include? And organizing ideas as well, using headings and subheadings. And at this moment, my business writing class is working on a white paper where they're going to learn about how to use headings and subheadings and how to group related ideas. So using short phrases that identify the kinds of items in each group. So instead of writing full sentences, short phrases can communicate what you need to as well. So the less text in some cases, the more friendly it's going to be toward your audience. And also selecting the medium. All right, so you want to think about what are your audience's preferences and expectations. So if I'm writing something, for example, to a VP, a memo might be the best medium to choose. It does have a more professional look to it, stylistic look to it than an email does. What are the technological resources that I have available, and how widely does it need to be distributed? Does it just need to go to admissions enrollment, for example, or is this something that may end up going out to a much wider body of people, like the entire faculty or an entire department, for example? And what kinds of records do you need to keep? Is this something that could possibly be used later on? Am I going to need to hold on to it, or is my audience going to need to hold on to it as well? And the urgency of communication. So if something needs, let's say graduation is happening next week, and the student that Dr. Zongwed just mentioned still hasn't had their problem resolved, then an email is probably much better than a memo, because that's where urgency comes into play, because this needs to happen very soon. With respect to Dr. Reed's email, this is where we get into sensitivity and confidentiality, because if the student that Dr. Reed just mentioned is, if this person's facing personal problems, then this is a very sensitive matter. So chances are that kind of message is going to be very confidential. So it's probably not going to go past the person with whom she communicated with. And I know when I was at Hampton University, whenever I needed to refer a student to the counseling center on campus, they always wanted things put in paper. They didn't want their forms sent over email because of confidentiality issues, because in their minds, that if something was sent over email, it could possibly be seen by somebody else. So if I ever needed to refer a student to the counseling center, we always had to print out the forms, write them by hand, and then deliver it to the person. And it could all do with what are the organizational practices or regulations within the organization or in the outside organization that you're speaking with. Right, now we get into kind of the nitty gritty of actually composing the message. And in my first year writing classes, my students' first assignment is to write a professional email to me, because if students are going to be communicating via some kind of text-based format, whether it's email or if I don't know how many of you text with students, there is a certain way of doing that. So first, if it's an email, always include a subject as well, and you'd be surprised. I know for some of us that might seem like common sense, but I've actually gotten quite a handful of emails from faculty and staff that don't have a subject. So if I don't see a subject, I might assume that that it's spam or junk mail. Now, if I see it's from a faculty member, I'll open it, but not everybody thinks that way. So you also want to greet the reader, and you'd be very surprised at how a little thing like "Hello, Dr. Reed" has so much of a different feel than just Dr. Reed. I always say "Hi, Dr. Reed" or "Hello, Dr. Reed," something, some kind of a greeting, which gives a little bit of a friendlier tone than just saying the person's name. And proofread your message to the best of your ability. And with students, if there are one or two typos, I don't usually make a huge issue about it. But if the message is written in text speak, then what I'll usually say is, please rewrite your message in the professional manner that we discussed, and I'll give an example as far as that goes. But this also applies to working with funders and colleagues. So particularly if you don't know the funder from NIH or from whatever organization is financing your project, hello, such and such is much more welcoming than such and such. And always provide your recipient with a way to establish contact. So you can contact me at such and such. So this, because what you're doing is you're building a bridge. You're inviting your recipient to communicate with you so that you can keep the relationship going. And other things to consider is you want to put on your best professional voice. And I kind of chuckled when Dr. Zongwood was saying, I don't want my student to see the ones where I was where I'm frustrated, because in that case, I'm putting on a much different voice when I'm frustrated than with respect to how I'm communicating positively. And always be welcoming as well. Start positively, like something like, I hope this email finds you well. You'd be surprised how one sentence like that can change the tone as far as that goes. And you always want to keep it brief. I made a little joke there by writing in concise and crossing it out because the two of them essentially are the same. But do try to keep it as brief as possible. There's no, a lot of students do ask me, when I write this, how many words does it have to be? How many pages? And in a lot of cases, I'll say, just say what you need to say, and don't include much more than what you need. So again, keeping it brief, like Dr. Reed was talking about. And whenever possible, divide your sections by paragraph. And email is typically a venue where we try to keep our correspondence brief. But if you have more than one idea to discuss, you really do want to divide it up by paragraph. I've gotten emails from from professionals that we're just one long paragraph with so many ideas in it, and it's very difficult for me to read if it's all in one paragraph. So if you divide them by paragraphs, it'll be much easier for your audience. And I always present paragraphs and punctuation a lot like traffic signals. So for example, if you're driving, you see the stop sign, it's telling you, okay, this is where I need to stop. Paragraphs function in very much the same way. Your paragraphs aren't set up for the writer, they're set up for the reader, so that your reader knows that, okay, this is where I'm going from one idea and I'm about to discuss with another. Now, if you have questions or need to discuss more than one thing, use the list format. Can you provide me with a status update? Can we meet to discuss such and such? Because if you use the listing format, it gives you it helps your reader to make sense of the different things, and it's much easier for them to respond if they can see numbers. And always close positively. Thank you for your time, and you always want to give that invitation to contact, and proofread to the best of your ability before you submit. And Dr. McCrary and I were actually talking about this when we planned this presentation, to try to aim to respond to inquiries within 24 hours. So, we're all busy, and I definitely fall into that category of always having things to do. But when it comes to inquiries, try to respond within 24 hours, excluding holidays and weekends. This way it helps keep your audience thinking, okay, this person is trying to respond to me. And on the other hand, if you're writing something, allow your recipient 24 hours to respond. So always understand that they could be busy as well with what they're doing. So this is something I actually learned here at UDC, to allow 24 hours to respond, just to allow other people to do other things as well. All right, and some final additional thoughts. So just summing up, to generate, gather, and record ideas for your topic, organize your ideas. So again, by using paragraphs, bullet points, lists, and select the medium as well. And again, sometimes a report or a memo is a much more appropriate medium than an email. And this next one I do want to spend a little bit of time with. Try not to write when you're feeling emotionally charged. And this is something I think we've all done. I've been guilty of this as well. So I have something that I need, or I'm trying to help a student, or maybe maybe I have some questions regarding funding or when I need to get the report in. So maybe I'm starting to get a little anxious, and maybe I'm starting to feel a little pushy. I find when I get into that emotional state, it's usually best for me to write it into a Word document first. And because as I find as I'm writing, I get my thoughts out and I start to make sense of the problem. So for example, if I'm trying to get the student cleared for graduation and I'm just getting really frustrated about it, I find that maybe writing it out into an email or out into a Word document first will help me to process some of those emotions when I'm writing. And if I walk away from it for a few hours, my emotions might settle a little bit. I might get into that place where I'm seeing things a little bit more logically, and I can approach it in a much more logical manner. Writing in drafts whenever possible. So I like to think of that Word document as the first draft, and when I come back to it, I can fine tune some of the language, maybe take out some of those emotionally charged words, and I can approach it in a much more logical way. And using visuals whenever possible. In an email, that may not be, but when it comes to things like reports and memos, using graphics and charts to convey numerical information can be a very helpful thing, because it's a lot less work for your reader to look at a chart than it is to look at text. All right, so that's essentially my presentation, but I guess we have time for questions. And I did see some people had some comments in the chat. I definitely did not want to ignore those in that case. So I did want to look at them, and I see. Okay. So Andrew Carson, note that there may be preferences in communication modality based on individual differences, such as autism spectrum, who tend to prefer email-based communications versus, say, phone. Yes, absolutely. As we're discussing, ableism and those issues, it becomes even more important. Dr. Reed, I see you have your hand up.
Good, thank you, Dr. Wynne. I just want to make a few comments. And I think it's really important that we use the Word opportunity to do your draft, your email in a Word document to clean it up, because what I have found, and I'm just saying that, at all levels, people send pretty bad emails. Their grammar, spelling, because we are setting an example for the students. So I think it's critical that we really set the example at a high level. And what I have found out when students say, "Hey, professor," I'm like, "Hey" is not a good term to use in an email, or just "Hey." I'm like, "Hey, who?" And what I found out when I talk to students, they don't know the name of their professors, and they don't take time to learn them. So if they just say, "Hey, professor," that means that's covering you. And I think it's critical, if you get a "Hey, professor," you go back and make sure that they add your name to it, because I was shocked at the end of the semester, students, they were complaining about some professor. And I'm like, "Well, what's the professor's name?" They're like, "I don't know." I said, "What do you mean you don't know?" They're like, "I don't know. I just call them 'Hey, professor,' or professor, so I don't have to learn their names," which is not a good practice as you move into business, that you do need to know names. So I just think if you get emails with that kind of title, there's some more backup that you really need to do with the student to say that that's really not appropriate, especially if you're trying to get something solved that you have not addressed the person professionally. And I don't know if anyone else has had that kind of issue as a part of receiving emails from students, but I will quickly send them corrected emails back. I don't care if they don't like it or not, but I think we need to teach them how to be better communicators. So I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely, yes, and that's one of the first lessons that I offer students in first year writing, because because a lot of their communication is going to be through email. So so when if I get something that says, hey, I say, okay, please rewrite this in the format, and I'll show you how to do it, dear Dr. Wynne, and then such and such. Absolutely.
I want to open it up to what other communication issues are you finding between colleagues and between faculty and students that we really need to zero in on as a university to ensure that we are providing the best example of good communication? Okay. Well,
Okay. I also saw I think Christian is off, but I see Andrew's still on. Understanding how your target is likely to prioritize your request can be helpful. Eisenhower's classification method can be useful here. Just because it's urgent and important for you doesn't mean it will be for them. Absolutely. So leading with a shared value can invite the recipient to see what you see as being important as also being so for them. So in other words, trying to see why, and I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying, Andrew. So essentially trying to get your audience to see why this issue should be important to them. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, hold on. Hi. Yeah, no, I think it's a great presentation, by the way, and very important. Well, I think you led with the idea earlier that a good greeting is helpful. And I've struggled with that, and I've had to work on that. And I'm trying to do that regularly now, as well as a closing, because I tend to be much more just, let's get to the facts, make the decision. And I'm hearing, okay, well, people like that. I said, okay, I'll do that. But there's some persuasive strategies you can use to get to the shared component, because being nice can get people to like you, but if communicating there's a shared value that you all have that lets them see what you're needing to get done as being important, I've found to be really helpful. Because if you don't do that, if someone's under stress and they're under a time crunch, they're going to be almost in a mental set to where anything that you request is going to get slept off as being less important. The only way you can get them to see this important is either to have their boss or someone that they think is high in the organization, or some shared value that you have to do, that you have in common. Those are like the two best methods, but it's a bad habit, I think, to always have to go up to get other people in the organization to do what you need them to do. It's much better to be able to just explain, like, here's something we're all in favor of. It's a shared value. Can you help me with this wherever possible?
And I just want to piggyback on what Andrew's talking about. A lot of people believe that if I put the president's name and the provost's name and the dean's name on the email, that it's going to get more attention. Well, it may, but the president's going to bring it back down to the provost. The provost is going to take it back to the dean. The dean's going to give it back to the chairperson. The chairperson's going to give it back to the faculty. So I think it's critical that we inform our students. Yes, I understand that you are trying to get people's attention, but it's going to go back down to the person who you should have originally had that conversation with. And then it's going to go back up the level if things are not being resolved. So I think, including the whole world into emails is not really something that we want to encourage students, and they may be frustrated. And again, but it should be your last resort where you can tell them that I have gone through the chain of command. I have tried to, get this resolved, and to no avail. But if it's your first time out, it's just going to trickle back down, and it only is going to continue to frustrate all the people up and down the chain of how this could be done. And I think we then again set the example that you don't always have to go to the big guns to get something resolved. So I just want to share that with the group.
Right, and I was actually an interim chair for a semester when I was at Hampton University, and I would get, and especially toward the end of the semester, I would get so many students filling out forms saying, you know, I have an issue with this professor in their grade, and I said, okay, have you talked to the professor? No. Okay, you need to do that first. Talk to that person as well, because because it's particularly the folks the higher up. They are the more correspondence they're probably getting from levels below them. So they're looking to see what okay, can this be resolved before I actually have to do anything about it? And that was definitely my way of thinking when I was in administration. I think
Bill, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, well, I was gonna, if there's time, I had another question to ask, and I think that I've seen some pretty poor business correspondence among more, because I interact primarily with faculty and staff, and I probably have generated some that's not, that could use a lot of improvement. And I think it's really helpful to get the feedback saying, hey, could you, work on this? But even that, it's useful to deliver in a way that's positive and constructive, right? And a lot of the time it's not delivered in that kind of way, the feedback. I think something like some practice events, this is a great session, but obviously people would now have to go to the video and then watch it to benefit from it. There's some similar kind of things on LinkedIn Learning as videos for business correspondence. One thing I'm going to try to do is to put together, curate some tools on things that might help students particularly, but maybe I can think about staff too, almost from an HR perspective. Business correspondence would be a great thing to add. Maybe Dr. Wynne, I could contact you and say, hey, can we use this? But I think actual practice, like an hour of just let's write some correspondence, like just like a workshop, might actually be really helpful for people, because then if people have received feedback, and I bet that a lot of people aren't 100% confident in their writing for these kinds of things, just some actual, like a workshop practice might be really helpful for people. And I don't know how to organize that at the university, and maybe it's embarrassing to people. People don't want to admit that they could benefit from it, but I think it might really be helpful for staff and faculty.
Well, and I'll take that, writing that down as an idea. I have the belief that I don't need 20,000 people to come to something for it to be beneficial. So I think if we craft it so it's not like, we're chastising people for not writing well, but improving our communication style so that it actually gets the effect we need to have. So I took that down, and maybe probably not this year, but the next calendar year, we can set up some practices. If people would like to have their emails, evaluated, or their writing evaluated, this is a, collegial peer type of activity. And again, some people may want to be invited to it because some people do not have the writing skill they think they have. No, I mean, people are not all people are not good writers. But again, as we are continuing to improve, because we are an educational institution, so hey, why not take care of ourselves as much as we take care of our students? So I definitely will look into that and see what we can do. This is an open forum, so we can actually use it the way we see fit.
And even
and I would be happy to help facilitate those as well. And I'm definitely, and as much as I study it, there's always more to learn for me as well. I mean, I've learned just in the session alone a couple of things, and I didn't learn about the 24-hour rule until I came to UDC. So so I'm still learning as I go.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for attending our business communication, our one-on-one, the little things, because the little things make a big difference in either good or bad perception and impressions that we make as we are communicating with each other, internally and externally. And I'd rather say keep it bad inside and make it good going out, because our impression can make it the difference of receiving money or not receiving money, or receiving the recognition that we need. So again, I want to thank you. Our next one is on November 8th. We're going to be sharing information about our continuing education program and what we have available that a lot of people don't even know. We have these workshops and our certificates that are available in addition to what we do in workforce development. So again, I want to thank everyone. We will be putting up in probably the next week the recording. They are all on our website under the CFO's site, and I'll make sure that they are available. And I want to say thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.